The first time I warned the county about the flood, Commissioner Dale Mercer smiled like I had brought him a pie instead of a problem. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "Main Street has handled rain for 100 years. Maybe it had. But not after they filled the old drainage ditch behind Miller's Hardware. Not after they paved over the low draw my father had marked in red ink back in 1969. And not with 3 days of hard Missouri rain moving toward Red Willow like a freight train in the dark. They called my map outdated. They called me sentimental. One man even asked if I had confused farm memory with engineering. I folded that old paper and went home with my hands shaking. But by Saturday morning, water was climbing the courthouse steps, and the only path left to save Main Street was the one my father had drawn 55 years earlier. My name is Martha Bell Whitaker, and I had lived east of Red Willow, Missouri, long enough to know the sound of rain before it arrived. Not the weather report kind, the real kind. A pressure in the windows, a sour smell lifting from the creek mud, cattle turning their backs to the wind before the first drop ever hits tin. My father taught me that. He was a quiet man named Hollis Bell, with hands shaped by fence wire and a habit of marking trouble before trouble had a name. In 1969, after a spring flood took out 2 hay sheds and half of Miller's bottom field, he drew a farm map across our kitchen table. Not pretty, not professional. Just pencil lines, red ink, creek bends, culverts, ditches, low draws, and little X marks where water always found its way when men pretended it wouldn't. He folded that map into wax paper and told me, "Martha, water remembers, people don't." I was 15 then. I thought he was talking like old farmers talk when they want children to stand still and listen. 55 years later, I understood him better. Red Willow was a county seat town with brick storefronts, hanging flower baskets, 1 courthouse square, and more pride than parking spaces. Main Street had Miller's Hardware, June's Cafe, the pharmacy, the barber shop, and the old theater nobody had the money to restore, but everybody had opinions about saving. That spring, the county started its beautification project. New sidewalks, decorative lamps, fresh curbs, a little stone welcome sign with native grasses planted around it, though nobody asked the native grasses how they felt about being arranged. Commissioner Dale Mercer loved that project like it was a newborn grandchild. He walked Main Street with rolled-up plans under his arm, telling business owners it would bring visitors, grants, maybe even a farmer's market that looked good in drone footage. I did not hate improvements. I hated what they covered. Behind Miller's Hardware, where the alley dipped low, county crews filled an old drainage ditch with gravel and packed clay. They said it was shallow, ugly, and no longer needed. I stood there in my work boots, holding the wax paper map against my chest, watching a yellow machine push dirt into the very cut my father had marked in red. I should have stepped forward then. Instead, I waited. That was my flaw. I had spent too many years being called dramatic, sentimental, old-fashioned, widow-worried, so I learned to measure my words until sometimes I measured them right out of existence. A week later, the forecast changed. 3 storm systems lined up west of us, dark and heavy, and the air outside my farmhouse went still enough to hear the refrigerator kick on from the porch. I took out my father's map. The red ink had faded, but the warning had not. The first county office smelled like burnt coffee and wet carpet, even though the rain had not started yet. I brought the map in a flat cardboard mailer because the fold lines had grown fragile with age. My hands looked older than usual against the brown paper, dirt under one thumbnail. A small nick from fixing fence wire that morning. Nothing about me said engineer, and I knew that before anyone in the room decided to notice. Commissioner Dale Mercer sat at the head of the conference table with a tablet, 2 project binders, and a silver pen he kept clicking open and shut. Across from him sat County Road Supervisor Jim Barlow, a broad man with sunburned cheeks and a voice like gravel in a bucket. Beside him was Nadine Ellis from planning, who wore red glasses and took notes in careful little squares. Dale smiled when I stepped in. "Mrs. Whitaker, we've got about 10 minutes before the contractor call. I only need 5 if you listen the first time." Jim's eyebrows moved. Nadine's pen paused. I opened the mailer and unfolded my father's map onto the table. The room got quiet, but not the respectful kind, more like the silence before somebody decides how small to make you. "This draw here," I said, tapping the faded red line behind Miller's Hardware. "It carries water off the east fields when Crow Creek backs up. Always has. You filled it last week." Dale leaned forward, glanced once, then sat back. "That's a family map. It's a farm map. Hand-drawn. My father drew it after the 1969 flood." Jim rubbed his jaw. "Ma'am, no offense, but drainage standards have changed since then. Water hasn't—" That came out sharper than I meant. Dale's smile held, but his eyes cooled. "We've completed modern site review," he said. "The project is permitted. The ditch you're referring to was classified as abandoned." "By who?" Nadine looked at her notes. "The 1998 corridor update." "Did that update happen in August?" She blinked. "I'm not sure why that matters." "Because August is dry, you map water in flood season, not when the land is pretending." Jim gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. Dale noticed, so did I. He folded his hands. "Mrs. Whitaker, I understand this map has sentimental value. Truly. I do. But we can't halt county work based on red ink from your kitchen table." My face warmed. It was not anger first. It was embarrassment. The old kind. The kind that makes you wish you had worn better shoes or used bigger words. "I began folding the map before I should have," Nadine said softly. "We could at least scan it for the file." Dale glanced at her. "Not necessary. We have current documentation." There it was, the little door closing. I slid the map back into its mailer, Sumasania. On my way out, Jim called after me, not unkindly. "We'll keep an eye on it." I turned at the doorway. "No," I said. "That's the trouble. You'll watch it after it starts moving." Nobody answered. Outside, the sky over Main Street had gone the color of pewter. The rain started Thursday night with a soft tapping on the porch roof. Not frightening at first, almost polite. I sat at my kitchen table with the old map spread beside a cup of black tea gone cold. Outside, the yard light caught silver lines of rain slanting past the barn. Every few minutes, thunder walked somewhere far off, low and patient. My son, Daniel, called from St. Louis around 9. "Mom, I saw the forecast. You okay out there?" "I've been through rain before." That's not an answer. Children grow up and start using your own tone against you. It's rude, but effective. "I'm watching the creek," I said. He was quiet for a second. "Did the county listen?" I rubbed one thumb over the wax paper edge. "They listened long enough to dismiss me properly." "Mom." "I know." "No. I don't think you do. You always do this thing where you warn people halfway, then retreat when they make you feel small." The words hit harder because he did not say them cruelly. The rain picked up. A steady drumming now. Water slipped from the eaves in beaded strings. I took them the map. "Did you leave them a copy?" My mouth opened. Nothing came out. Daniel sighed. "Not angry, tired. You kept the only proof." It's fragile. So are people on Main Street? That sat between us like a chair pulled out and left empty. My first instinct was to defend myself, to say he didn't know how Dale Mercer smiled, how men in county offices could make a woman feel 15 again, standing with mud on her shoes and truth in her hands. How widowhood teaches you to carry things alone because asking twice starts to feel like begging. But none of that changed what Daniel had said. "I'll make copies in the morning," I told him. Tonight would be better. The copy shop's closed. Then take pictures. Email them. Something. I looked down at the map. My father's red marks seemed darker in the lamplight, like they were rising through the paper. After we hung up, I stood on the porch for a long time with my phone in my hand. The rain had turned hard enough to flatten the grass. Across the east field, water already gathered in the old tractor ruts and shone whenever lightning opened the sky. Farther off, toward town, I could not see Main Street, but I could picture the filled ditch behind Miller's Hardware as clearly as if I stood beside it. I took 12 photos of the map, some blurred because my hands shook. I emailed them to Dale Mercer, Jim Barlow, Nadine Ellis, and the county emergency address. In the subject line, I typed, "Flood route warning, Main Street drainage." Then I added one sentence, "Please do not wait until the water proves me right." I hit send at 10:47 p.m. The rain answered against the roof. By morning, only Nadine had replied. Her email came at 6:18 a.m., short enough to fit on one phone screen. "Received. I'll print and review. Please stay safe." That was all. But it was the first sentence from the county that did not pat me on the head. Rain had worked through the night without resting. The east pasture was no longer pasture. It had become a dull brown sheet, broken only by fence posts and the backs of drowned grass clumps. Crow Creek had swollen beyond its banks and was nosing into the lower soybean field like an animal searching for a weak place. I put on my father's old canvas coat, though it still smelled faintly of machine oil after all those years, and drove toward town. The road shoulders ran with water. Every culvert gurgled. At the bridge over Miller's Draw, I slowed and saw exactly what I had feared. The old flow had nowhere to go. Water pressed against the new packed clay behind the hardware store, spreading sideways instead of slipping through the drainage cut. It moved along the alley, then curled toward Main Street behind the bakery and pharmacy. I parked crooked by June's Cafe and stepped into rain that slapped cold against my cheeks. Subterias. Inside, the breakfast crowd had turned from gossip to weather. Boots squeaked. Jackets dripped on the tile. The windows fogged around the edges. June herself stood behind the counter, arms folded over her apron. "Martha Bell," she said, "please tell me you ain't here for pancakes." I wish I was. A few heads turned. I pointed toward the back alley. Water's stacking behind Miller's. If it gets over the curb, it'll run straight down Main. An old man at the counter muttered, "County said the project fixed that." The county filled the drain that fixed that. Silence spread across the cafe. Then Dale Mercer walked in with Jim Barlow behind him, both wearing rain jackets, both already tense. Dale saw me and stopped like the room had placed me there on purpose. "Martha, we're monitoring the situation." June snorted. "That means what, exactly?" Looking damp and important. Jim wiped rain from his face. "Crews are checking barricades." "Barricades won't drain water," I said. Dale's voice lowered. "This is not the place." "No," I said, feeling my own voice shake. "The place was your conference room. Yesterday. Before this." A young waitress by the register looked from me to him. Somebody's phone was recording. I could feel it. That public edge. That old humiliation rising. I almost stopped. Then I thought of Daniel saying, "So are people on Main Street." I pulled the printed copy of my father's map from inside my coat. The ink had bled a little where rain touched one corner. "The old culvert is still there," I said. "Buried under the alley fill. About 20 feet east of Miller's loading door. If you open that route, water goes back toward the draw." Jim stepped closer despite himself. Dale didn't move. Outside, thunder cracked hard enough to rattle the cafe windows, and somewhere behind the buildings, a woman shouted that water was coming over the curb. The shout came from Clara Webb, who owned the bakery and had a voice that could cut through thunder, church bells, and most family arguments. "Water's in the alley." Chairs scraped back. Half the cafe moved to the windows. Through the rain-blurred glass, I saw brown water sliding behind the buildings, carrying leaves, gravel, and one white plastic bucket that spun like it had lost its mind. Jim Barlow pushed past me and went outside. I followed, map clutched under my coat. The alley behind Main Street had become a narrow river. Water pressed against the new landscaping stones, then spilled around them as if they were children's toys. Behind Miller's Hardware, the packed clay berm bulged dark and slick. Jim stared at it. "Where's this culvert supposed to be?" I pointed through the rain. "There, east of the loading door, under the fill." He squinted. "That's not on our current utility layer." "No," I said, "because your current layer forgot what the ground remembered." Dale came up behind us, breathing hard. Rain ran from the brim of his county cap down his collar. For the first time, he did not look polished. He looked wet, human, and cornered. "Jim," he said, "can we verify before digging into a finished project?" Jim turned slowly. "Dale, water's verifying plenty." A few townspeople had gathered under awnings. Phones were out, not in a cruel way now, in a scared way. The pharmacy owner stood at her back door with towels stuffed along the threshold. Nadine arrived 10 minutes later in a county pickup, red glasses fogged, hair plastered to one cheek. She carried a plastic folder over her head and nearly slipped getting out. "I found the 1969 drainage survey," she called. Dale's face changed. "Not much, but I saw it." Nadine held out a printed sheet. "The old culvert is real. It was listed as seasonal overflow relief. The 1998 update marked it inactive, but there's no removal record." Jim took the paper and looked from it to my map. "Lines match," he said. The rain seemed louder after that. Dale stared at the survey. His mouth opened, then closed. That was the private doubt becoming visible at the edge of his face, but he still wasn't ready to surrender it. "The contractor said the fill was clear," he said. Nadine wiped rain from her glasses with the hem of her jacket. "The contractor used the 1998 file. And I warned you, the 1998 file was wrong," I said. I did not shout. I didn't need to. The alley did enough shouting for all of us. Jim grabbed his radio. "Get me a backhoe to Miller's. Sandbags, too. And call emergency management, we may have to cut the alley." Dale stepped closer to him. "You're authorizing that." Jim looked at the water curling around the pharmacy door. "I'm preventing Main Street from becoming Crow Creek." Dale turned to me then. For 1 second, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he swallowed and said, "Show us exactly where." That was not trust. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the wall. The backhoe arrived 20 minutes later, yellow arms swinging through sheets of rain. By then, Main Street was no longer pretending it had time. Water had reached the pharmacy threshold. Clara's bakery crew was stacking flour bags on tables. Miller's Hardware had 3 men hauling paint cans off the bottom shelves while Mrs. Miller stood at the register with both hands pressed to her mouth. Jim Barlow climbed into the backhoe himself because the county operator was still coming from the north shed. Dale stood beside him, rain dripping from his chin. "Martha," Jim called, "mark it." I walked into the alley with my father's map in one hand and Nadine's survey in the other. My boots sank into gravel and mud. The water pushed against my calves, colder and stronger than it looked. For 1 second, I saw my father at our kitchen table, red pencil behind his ear, saying, "Water remembers, people don't." I marked the spot with an orange traffic cone. "There." Jim stared at the cone. "You sure?" A dozen people watched from doorways and awnings. Dale watched hardest of all. The truth was, I was not as sure as I sounded. The map was old. The alley had been reshaped. Buildings had changed. 55 years is a long time for a paper line to survive in the real world. But fear is not always a warning to stop. Sometimes it is the price of finally standing still. "I'm sure enough," I said. Jim lowered the bucket. The first bite tore through fresh gravel. The second scraped packed clay. Water rushed into the shallow cut and immediately turned it into soup. Nothing happened. A few people shifted. Dale looked toward the courthouse square, where water had begun crawling over the curbstones. Jim dug again. The bucket hit something hard with a dull clang. "There," I said, before I meant to. Jim leaned forward. Could be old pipe. Could be junk. He scraped sideways. A round concrete edge appeared beneath the mud. Nadine breathed. "That's it." Then the berm above it slumped. Brown water surged into the hole so fast Jim had to reverse the backhoe. Mud sprayed across the alley. Clara screamed. Someone shouted for people to move back. The cut widened. But the culvert did not drain. It choked. A tangle of roots, gravel, construction fabric, and broken brick jammed the mouth like a fist shoved into a throat. Jim cursed under his breath. Dale turned pale. "Can you clear it?" "Not from the machine. I'll break the pipe." The water behind us rose another inch against the bakery wall. For a moment, everything stopped except the rain. That was the temporary failure nobody wanted to name. The old map had been right, and it still might not be enough. Then June's nephew, a skinny firefighter named Cole, stepped from under the awning. "I can get in there with a hook." Jim shook his head. "Current'll pull you." Cole looked at me. How deep? I looked at the map again, then at the water rolling past my boots. "Waist deep at the mouth," I said. "Maybe more now." Dale whispered, almost to himself. "We should have opened it yesterday." Nobody corrected him. Because this time, he was finally telling the truth. Cole tied a rescue rope around his waist while rainwater ran off his helmet in steady streams. He was 24, maybe 25, all elbows and nerve. With that volunteer firefighter look young men get in small towns, half fear, half pride, and a stubborn belief that somebody ought to do the dangerous thing if it needs doing. Jim held the other end of the rope. "No hero nonsense," Jim said. "You feel that current pull, you back out." Cole nodded. "Yeah, yes, sir." Dale stood near the bakery wall, staring at the clogged culvert like it had become a judge. His phone kept buzzing in his hand. County alerts. Business owners. Maybe news. Maybe angry voters. For once, he didn't answer. I stepped close enough that only he could hear me over the rain. "You saw Nadine's survey before today, didn't you?" His eyes flicked to mine. There it was. A private doubt, dragged wet into daylight. "Yesterday afternoon," he said. The words were barely louder than the storm. And he looked toward the courthouse square, where water now rippled around the base of the Veterans Memorial. I thought there'd be time to verify it properly. "No," I said. "You thought there'd be time to be right without admitting I was." His face tightened, but he did not deny it. Cole eased into the water with a long-handled debris hook. Satsuktu, the current shoved at him immediately. Jim and 2 firefighters leaned back on the rope. The water rose to Cole's thighs, then his waist as he reached the culvert mouth. "Easy," Jim barked. Cole dug the hook into the jam and pulled. Roots came first, black and slick. Then a strip of construction fabric snapped loose and slapped against the water like a dead flag. The current grabbed it and tried to twist Cole sideways. "Hold him," Clara screamed. People who had laughed at my map were now holding sandbags, ropes, flashlights, anything that made them feel useful. That is the thing about fear. It can make a crowd cruel, but it can also make them honest. Cole pulled again. Nothing. He braced one boot against the concrete rim and leaned back with his whole body. The jam shifted. A deep sucking sound came from the culvert, low and ugly, like the earth clearing its throat. Then water punched through. Not all at once. First a hard brown funnel, then a rushing pull that dropped the alley water by inches in less than a minute. Mud, leaves, gravel, and years of bad decisions vanished into the pipe. The crowd shouted, but not like celebration. More like release. Jim grabbed his radio, flow established behind Miller's. "Repeat, flow established. Get sandbags to the pharmacy and keep people off the alley." Dale looked at me then. Rainwater ran down his face, or maybe not all of it was rain. I won't pretend I knew. "Martha," he said, "I should have stopped the fill when you brought the map." "Before that, I said—" He nodded once, hard. "Before that." It was not a full apology. Not yet. But Main Street had stopped drowning. And sometimes the first honest thing a person says is, "Not sorry." Sometimes it is before. Once the culvert opened, Red Willow changed sounds. Before, everything had been panic rain hammering awnings, people shouting over engines, water slapping brick walls. After the blockage broke, there came a lower sound beneath it all, a steady pull, the old draw taking back the work it had always done. Water still covered Main Street, but it stopped climbing. That mattered more than people understood at first. Jim sent crews to sandbag the pharmacy and bakery doors. Nadine stood under June's awning with both maps spread across a plywood board, pointing crews toward side drains that had not been checked in years. June handed out coffee in paper cups and shouted at anybody who tried to pay her. "Money's wet today," she said. "Come back when it dries." By noon, the courthouse steps were slick but visible again. Miller's Hardware had taken water in the storeroom, but the main floor held. The pharmacy lost a few boxes of paper supplies, not medicine. Clara's bakery smelled like wet flour and cinnamon, which somehow made the whole scene sadder. Dale Mercer called an emergency press briefing in front of the courthouse at 1 o'clock. I did not want to stand beside him. My coat was muddy to the waist, my hair had escaped every pin, my father's map was back inside its plastic sleeve, but one edge had softened from rain, and the red line behind Miller's had bled slightly, like a wound reopened. Dale asked me quietly, "Will you stay?" I looked at Main Street, at people pushing water with brooms, at Cole sitting on the curb wrapped in a fire blanket while Clara fussed over him like he was 12. "I'll stay," I said. "Don't make it pretty." He nodded. When the local reporter lifted her phone to record, Dale removed his county cap. That small gesture did more than I expected. Earlier this week, he said, Mrs. Martha Bell Whitaker brought the county a farm map drawn by her father after the 1969 flood. That map showed a seasonal drainage route behind Miller's Hardware. I dismissed it as outdated and sentimental. The words outdated and sentimental landed in the wet air between us. Dale swallowed. I also reviewed information yesterday that should have made me pause the fill work immediately. I did not. I chose project momentum over local knowledge, and Main Street nearly paid for that choice. Nobody clapped. Good. Some moments should not be decorated too soon. He turned to me. Mrs. Whitaker, I'm sorry. Not just for ignoring your map. For making you feel like the life you've spent watching this land counted less than a file stamped newer. My throat tightened before I could stop it. I thought of my father's hands smoothing that paper on our kitchen table. I thought of Daniel's voice saying fragile people. I thought of all the times I had folded truth away, because someone else made the room feel too small for it. I stepped to the microphone. My father used to say water remembers. Today, I'd add this, so does a town, if it's brave enough to. Behind us, Main Street kept draining. Not saved perfectly, but saved enough. By evening, the rain softened into a tired mist. Main Street looked bruised. Mud streaked the sidewalks. Flower baskets hung crooked from the new lampposts. June's Cafe had 3 inches of water in the storage room, and Miller's Hardware lost a pallet of fertilizer they had stacked too low. The beautification stones behind the alley were gone, carried off like the creek had taken offense at being decorated. But the pharmacy stayed open. The courthouse basement stayed dry, and the old theater, which everyone had been arguing about for 15 years, still stood with its marquee lights flickering weakly through the rain. My farm did not escape untouched. Crow Creek cut a new bite out of my lower pasture, taking 2 fence posts and leaving a mess of limbs against the south gate. The gravel lane washed thin near the mailbox. In the morning, I would have to call the insurance office, then the fencing man, then probably Daniel, though I knew he would come whether I asked or not. That night, I spread my father's map on the kitchen table with towels around the edges. The red ink had blurred behind Miller's Hardware, not ruined, changed. Daniel arrived after dark, still in his work shirt, face tired from the drive. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the map, then at me. You okay? I gave the answer mothers give when they are not okay, but still upright. I'm here. He crossed the room and hugged me before I could prepare for it. For a moment, I was not a widow farmer, not the woman who had argued with the county, not the person people were suddenly calling a hero online. I was just somebody's mother, wet-eyed and worn out, holding on. Later, Dale Mercer came by in his county truck. He did not come up the porch steps at first. He stood in the yard with his cap in both hands, as if the house itself had to decide whether to receive him. Daniel opened the door and looked at me. I nodded. Dale stepped inside and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Emergency repair authorization for your lane and pasture fence, he said. County caused part of the drainage obstruction. We'll document the rest. That sounds almost like accountability. He gave a small, tired smile. I'm practicing. I did not forgive him all at once. Stories are cleaner when forgiveness comes with music under it. Real life makes you sign forms, replace fence wire, and decide whether an apology keeps its shape after people stop watching. But when Dale asked if the county could archive a copy of my father's map, I said yes. Not the original. Some things stay with the family. Before Daniel left for bed, he touched the wax paper gently. Grandpa knew. I looked at the blurred red line. He listened. I said, that's different. Outside, Crow Creek kept moving through the dark. No longer angry, not exactly peaceful either. Just moving. And this time, Red Willow knew better than to pretend it wasn't there. One of the most valuable lessons in life is that wisdom does not always come from the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it comes from people who have quietly spent years paying attention, learning from experience, and respecting what others overlook. Martha's old farm map mattered because it represented knowledge earned through observation, patience, and care. In our own lives, we should be careful not to dismiss people simply because they are older, quieter, or less polished than everyone else. The truth we need may be carried by someone who has been trying to warn us all along. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been ignored when you knew you were right, or seen someone's experience save the day? We'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoy inspiring stories about resilience, rural life, justice, and the power of ordinary people, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join our growing community. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life.